Wow, look at you lovely people. Blimey. How many of you came and stayed? That's so wonderful, wonderful. I don't know where our lovely interlocutor is. Maybe he's coming. But can I just tell you...
Maybe he's taken fright.
I don't know. Can I just tell you a secret? William is an absolute super trooper today because he had an absolutely appalling case of food poisoning last night. I mean, some of you may not have sympathy. He ate prawns. I mean, what do you expect? But he was sick as a dog yesterday in Chennai and missed one of his sessions.
Yesterday, I was in a session like this, and I literally had to run off the stage.
Don't finish.
I made it.
Yeah, don't finish that story, was what I was going to say. It did not end well, but he's here. Anyway, hello, you can do this now. I was waiting for your chair to come. Right, I'll stop talking.
Thank you, Bangalore, for showing up in such great numbers. It's a great Sunday evening here. I've been listening to Empire, the podcast, from the day it went on air. How many of you here have heard at least one episode? Are there any here who have not missed a single episode?
Oh.
Golden ticket winners. So I reached out to...
You get to the front of the signing queue afterwards.
Yes. So I reached out to the producers of the podcast, Goal Hanger. Many of you are familiar with The Rest is History. That's also by Goal Hanger. And I learned of some incredible stats. Brace yourselves. Empire has about 2.5 million downloads per month, which is insane. 211 episodes have gone live across platforms. It's in the 12th series that's going on. About 66% of the listenership comes from outside of the UK. And I think that kind of shows the diversity.
Which is different from the other Goal Hanger podcasts, which are mainly UK-based.
Podcasts, yes. And we know William travels around the world, has film festival duties, book tours, and the podcast has been recorded from Australia, India, the UK, of course, Indonesia, and Hong Kong. So you've kept up. And that's just incredible. But let me just jump back and go to Kohinoor, which was your first collaboration. And we've just been told we've run out of copies and we're scampering to get copies for you to sort of purchase and for you to sign. What prompted the move to a new collaboration, and especially in the form of a podcast? William, you want to start, or Anita?
Let me, because he's prawn bound. So this is one of those occasions where he said, "Can you do most of the talking?" And I was like, "Get out of my way!" Waiting for this.
This is the moment you've been waiting for 2.5 years.
I mean, he doesn't know I supplied the prawns, but it's... So, I mean, just first of all, the Kohinoor collaboration happened because of white wine and a green room, I think. So it was Willie's JLF in London, and we were just telling each other tall tales. We'd been friends before that. And one book that I'd written had the Kohinoor as a bit part player in the story of Maharaja Dalip Singh, who is the last Maharaja of the Punjab Sikh Empire, and his daughter. And Willie had just finished a book about Afghanistan, which had also had this diamond twinkling in the background. So we were swapping stories. And at one point, I told him something he didn't know. He told me something. I was like, oh, bloody hell, I didn't know that. And he suddenly said, he says he said it, but it was me. And I said, oh, God, we should write a book about this. Anyway, promptly forgot all about it.
In the original conception, there was also Navtej Sana in the conversation.
That's exactly right. Yes,
Navtej was on the same panel and had also written about the Kohinoor. But
in the sort of an earlier Ranjit Singh period.
Then he got posted to London as ambassador to the UK, and everyone thought it'd be a bit undiplomatic if he wrote a book asking for the Kohinoor back.
And he's the UK High Commissioner, quite right. But then I forgot all about it until about... I think it was about 6 months later when Willie rang up and said, "Okay, it's on." And I was like, "What's on?" He goes, that thing, we've got to just write it. I was like, "What are you even talking about?" And he said, "Kohinoor, you've got a book deal. And when do we have to deliver?" Well, we had it in a year, but then we accelerated that by 6 months because there was a huge controversy that was kicked up by the Attorney General in India.
The Attorney General bizarrely said that it was a kind of extraordinary moment. The Attorney General of this government, that's meant to be a nationalist government, produced a statement saying that the Koh-i-Noor had been given to the British by Ranjit Singh. Now, in reality, Ranjit Singh was how many years dead?
Oh, he was about 14 years dead.
14 years dead. So if he gave it to the British, he would have had to have done it by a Ouija board or astral projection or something, which is not impossible, I suppose.
Anyway, to actually finally answer your question, which we will eventually, the podcast, we got on so well writing the book.
Even more, because the writing was slightly separate. You were sitting in London discovering atrocities there.
Yeah.
And then I would try and ring up and trump you and say, oh no, it gets even worse in the Punjab.
It was the most appalling WhatsApp conversation you've ever seen, where I'd say, I've got a flaying. He said, I've got a burning. I said, I've got a disembowelment.
And then I've got a pouring molten gold over the head. That was the Trump moment.
It was just such a good thing. But it was you, first of all, who were approached, because so he was a guest on The Rest is History. And I know this is going to be really hard to believe, but he took over.
Okay, so there's a good story. There's a good story here. So the night before I went on The Rest of History, that was then quite a small, it was not the big juggernaut it is now.
No.
It is now the world's most popular history podcast with something unbelievable like...
Yeah, for now.
We're coming out. It's taking a slow, sort of steady route. But I had for dinner a wonderful historian called Ben McIntyre. And I mentioned that I was going on the following day to Tom Holland's podcast. And he said, oh, God, those guys, for fuck's sake, he said, they don't let you get a word in edgeways. They just talk to each other and totally ignore their guests. My advice to you, he said, is just put out your platter and just talk non-stop and don't let them get a word in edgeways. So I did this. And there had been, the backstory, there had been a video that had gone viral in Britain that month about a guy who's walking his dog in Richmond Park. And you see this guy shouting at the dog, whose name is Fenton.
Because the dog is chasing the deer. You have to know why. There are deer in Richmond Park. So the dog, and you're not allowed to do that, dog is off the leash, chasing the deer, and all you hear is this poor man going, Fenton! Fenton! Jesus Christ, Fenton! Jesus, Fenton! That's all he keeps shouting.
So halfway through my non-stop version of Afghanistan, which is what I got on for, Tom Holland started shouting, Fenton! Fenton!
For God's sake,
Come
Fenton.
back, Fenton!
Jesus, Fenton. Yeah.
Anyway, it was at that point their best ever download. So they asked me if there's anyone that I would like to do a podcast with. Yeah. And I just had dinner with Anita the night before. Yeah. And I just remember driving back from that dinner, laughing at all the punchlines of the jokes I hadn't got during dinner. And there was a full 20 minutes of cackling madly to myself in the car. So when they rang up and said, would you like to do this? There was only one person to do it with. Yeah.
Isn't that lovely? That's so sweet.
It shows when you listen to the podcast, the fact that this is a right mix of people. And there is a proliferation of podcasts, across, if you look up any of the podcasting apps, and there is this format of people talking to each other. But I think what's refreshingly different about Empire is that the people in the podcast, they are thoroughly well-researched and informed on that subject. So it is not just two people just, talking shop. Tell us a bit about the process. You've both approached history as a subject for writing as books, but for, let's say, pick up an episode of your choice and tell us a bit about how do you plan towards the go-live date of the podcast?
So we tend to come up with ideas well in advance. So, for example, we've got an idea of Ireland cooking at the moment, which is... I'm getting more and more excited by it.
It's so exciting, and it involves so much of India in it
What's
as well.
fascinating is that Ireland was really the laboratory for the British to work out all the things that they then do in India.
Yeah.
And I hadn't realised this. And the more you read about it, because the English imperialism in Ireland dates back to the 12th century. And you get the big beginning of the plantations, which is when they start taking land and seizing it, and what we would call ethnically cleansing the original inhabitants. That starts taking place in the 17th century, at the same time as the East India Company is just starting up. 1599, they apply for the patent of the East India Company. 1606 is the Virginia Company, when they start colonizing chunks of North America. 1608 is the Society of London Merchants in Ireland, I think they're called.
Yeah, exactly right. And you know, Ireland suffered the predations of colonialism to the point where they have a terrible potato famine, which kills thousands and thousands of people. But the irony, hundreds of thousands of people. But the irony is that when you come to the colonial experience here in India, so many Irish signed up to do it. And we're often had some of the most brutal stories. So that's why we want to do Ireland. Anyway, to answer your question... Hang on, he had a question.
Tell your story about the Punjab.
Punjab. Yes. I mean, if you were in my Udham Singh session earlier, the guy who is Lieutenant Governor of Punjab, who kind of presided over the most brutal oppression of Punjab, the strafing of civilians from the sky by warplanes, often... Some of the people who'd come back from fighting for the British in Europe are being strafed from the sky, floggings, and the Jallianwala Bagh massacre all happened on his watch, was an Irish Catholic from Tipperary, which is why we're really excited about this. And I mentioned to the lovely audience I had earlier on today that when I wrote the book about Udham Singh, and this whole, it sort of intertwines the story of this Irish Catholic who ends up presiding over one of the worst horrors in colonial history. And this man, this orphan, who waits 20 years to wreak his revenge and then shoots him dead in London during wartime. And when I sort of talk about it and write about that, when I did it and I did a tour of Great Britain, I had so many letters from Ireland saying, "We are so sorry, we did not know that we gave you that bastard," quote unquote. And it happened quite a lot. But your question was, how do we... So I remember you had a question. The question was, how do we go about it? So we come up with these ideas and we'll talk about it. And we'll, we love each other's company. So we'll have an argument about it. We'll robustly discuss it. And we'll come up with a plan. And it's one that we're really happy with. And then it's a little bit like doing a university viva every week, in that you get sort of these door-stopper books. But luckily, it's because...
It is, it's literally, I mean, I remember, felt like A-level. I did 4 humanities A-levels and had to do 4 essays a week. And there's always that moment on Tuesday morning when you realise you haven't done the reading for the Wednesday essay. Yeah. And it's like that. And suddenly you come back from a lovely holiday, you suddenly realise you've got to record an hour about a subject of which you know absolutely nothing at all by the following night.
But the thing that's easy is because we've both picked the subject and we're both enthusiastic about it. So, and you also have very different working styles. So he's not wrong about treating it like A-levels because he's tinkering around with it the second before we start recording.
And I expect you to have read it. You never have.
Yes, I know. I always have. I've always read it. But it's all, it's sort of that kind of
we have a script.
Preparation. Yeah. So we knock together a kind of a roadmap. It's not a script. It's a roadmap, which is, this is the story. These are the points that we want to hit. Nothing we do is really scripted. We just chat, which I think comes across. So.
And I recall the first episode. I think at the time it had released, I think this whole narrative was around, I think Shashi Tharoor's An Era of Darkness had come out at the time, and the whole story around the British loot that happened. That was something I think the Empire sort of tapped into. You sort of began with that, but I think from what I've followed of the podcast, it's kind of branched into various territories. And I think I've noted there's Mughal history, there is pirates and pirate hunters. You've spoken about that. You've spoken about Long John Silver, Captain Hook, Peter Pan, Chinese history, the Cuban Revolution, the birth of Korea. I think you've sort of covered all of those things. Has that been organic, or is that something you strategically plan with every season?
I mean, we plan a couple of months ahead. But not more than that. And it is very much an enthusiasm. I mean, you, for example, came up with the idea of the American series, which was...
Yeah, so I mean, my day job is I'm a journalist and I work for news. And so when there is a story that I feel is kind of bubbling up and will be of huge interest So I remember America was the American Empire. I wanted to, but the
Just
Iranian
before the American election.
but also the Iranian, the Persian Empire. I just felt that the people really want to know, because they don't know, the very basics often, which is what's the difference between Shia and Sunni. Why are we in this situation? Why are they ayatollahs? So let's go right back to the beginning and do it. So a little bit is new sense, and a lot of it is just passion. So one we've done, which I love, I don't think it's out yet, but it's to coincide with Christmas.
This
is your brilliant idea of the Magi and the trade of frankincense. So this trade of incense.
So maybe explain.
Go for it.
Yeah. So in the Christmas story, in the Christian Gospels, there's two utterly different accounts of the birth of Jesus, and only two out of the four Gospels. So there's four Gospels. Two don't mention the birth at all, and the two that do mention it have completely different cast. Yeah. In one Gospel, there's a load of shepherds that turn up.
Yeah.
In the other, you get what in the original Greek is called the Magi. Now, it's usually translated and understood around the world to be three kings, to be wise men, but it's not actually what was originally meant. The Greek is quite specific. It's Magi. The Magi are the astronomer kings of the Zoroastrian faith coming from Persia. So St. Matthew, the only gospel writer that mentions them, has introduced to the story the idea that there's a bunch of Persians turning up, having followed a star, experts in astronomy, and that St. Matthew, who is Jewish and is very keen in his gospel to make everything rhyme with Jewish tradition, is making a point about various characters in the Old Testament. But it's extraordinary story because in its travel, the story changes, and now we sing "We Three Kings," and we always imagine them, and that doesn't happen apparently till the 7th century. That they become kings, and it happens in North Africa of all places with a theologian called Tertullian. Anyway, this kind of weird stuff.
Well, it's weird stuff, but it's also the intersection of different empires, which is why we feel, it's a great story to tell. The Persian Empire, the empire of Judea and King Herod, and all of those times. The one that we've just done, which I loved so much, I can't tell you, was about the gold, frankincense, and myrrh were the gifts to the baby Jesus. That's every nativity does that. Every child who has to carry the myrrh is the most miserable, because what the hell is myrrh? That kind of feeling. So we did this whole thing about this one civilization that's been completely forgotten. You may not even have heard of it. They're Nabateans, who corner the market on incense, bringing it from Yemen and then taking it to to Egypt, where you'll find that some of this stuff is used in embalming.
And to Gaza.
Gaza
is the biggest
ports.
port of the period.
Yeah.
Gaza is this rich metropolis where all the ships carrying stuff from Arabia set off to Italy.
And I just noticed, I rewatched, because the story of the Nabateans, the real story of the Nabateans, it mirrors so closely the fictional story of Dune. If any of you have seen that, it takes about 3 years to watch one of the installments of Dune. But the story is so very similar. Spice equates to frankincense, equates to a people who, first of all, are the guides for these caravans that carry it, then are the corner of the market, and then are completely dispossessed of it. So that's why we can go anywhere.
And then the imperial forces turn up in the shape of Rome.
Exactly. So coming back to your question. Somewhere in there is the answer. But
That's the other name of the session, coming back to your question. Go ahead. I think the one aspect, Anushka, who's the producer, she said, I think the episodes on the Vietnam War, I think they have been the most downloaded episodes. What have been your
What was the two?
And Vietnam.
Vietnam and?
Vietnam. I think
Vietnam, yes.
Yeah,
Vietnam.
okay.
Those were the most downloaded episodes. I think they found resonance globally. What have been some of your favorite episodes that you enjoyed recording?
So it's very interesting. There's absolutely no question that the most popular episodes are the most recent. And I think the two most popular episodes were, other than Vietnam, was the Iranian Revolution, both 1970s. So we're deciding when we're going to do the Irish episode that we'll concentrate a lot on the Troubles and the pub bombings, all that stuff in the 1970s with the IRA and so on. And we've got the amazing Patrick Radden Keefe, who's done this big Netflix series called Say Nothing. He's coming on to talk to us about that. So it's going to be a big blockbuster. But I think you are more. I mean, you're a proper news journalist, and you are
Yeah.
much more into the contemporary world. I'm always
God,
trying
I
to
love
push it
it.
back into ancient Egypt and Magi and Nabateans.
I mean, I love the Nabateans, don't get me wrong. But I found the podcast listening world is skewed younger. And I think that what we've seen, certainly where we come from in Britain, is people always say, well, we were never taught this at school. And there's a lot more questioning of why is the world in the mess that it's in? Discuss. Please explain, why the hell do these people hate each other? Why are these people killing each other? And so my news spider sense always, it's the same question I would ask. You know, why is this conflict happening? Why are these people so dead set against these other people? And so I'm excited. So I'm sort of led by my own excitement.
I think one of the interesting things about history is that in every country, obviously, the government sets the curriculum.
Yeah.
And as we've seen in this country, as the governments change, so history gets edited and cut and rewritten. And what's taught and what's foregrounded gets changed. But that's not just India. The same happens all over the world. And even in Britain, which is a place which is not normally known for sort of political upheavals, there's been a definite move on the right wing in response to writers like myself, Shashi, Satnam Sanghera, who've raised the whole issue of colonialism. There's a whole right-wing constituency in Britain which does not want this to be addressed. And I think Indians often imagine that it'd be very difficult to write about colonialism in Britain. It wasn't, but it's becoming so now. And there's definitely now a pushback from the right saying, you know, the British Empire was wonderful, we should all be proud of our past. And Liz Truss, our least successful Prime Minister, who famously lasted less long than a cabbage.
I mean, just for accuracy, it was a lettuce.
Fact check, important fact check.
Yeah.
The lettuce, yes. And she stood up at the Tory party conference and started attacking unpatriotic historians, by which she meant David Olusoga, me, and Shashi Tharoor. I mean, or the British ones, I suppose, rather than Shashi. But there's now, so it's become an issue. And the same is true everywhere. The same is true in Pakistan, who get a completely different version of your shared history. The same is true in Israel and Palestine, obviously, where the Israelis and the Palestinians have completely different history taught to them. And the reason, I think, that podcasts like ours are listened to around the world is that we don't follow a national agenda. We can say what we like. We really can. And you feel, I think, the difference between your day job and this, too.
I mean, no. No. Nobody sets an agenda for me there.
I would never embarrass you in public.
But I'll tell you what. But what is I think really interesting. There was a panel here with Rajdeep Sardesai and a very illustrious. You saw that panel, and it was talking about the kind of consumption of news, and that they're here, and I've seen it myself. You've got the 9 o'clock, basically WWF punch up, just shouting. And the fact that news is kind of pressured to be given in little nuggets. Well, you guys don't want that. I mean, the growth of the podcast arena shows that is not how you like to consume information. And this kind of rocketing, I mean, you know, this is your world, you're looking at it. The exponential growth of things like Empire, we never imagined when we started this. Well, I certainly didn't imagine it would take over so much of my life, really, frankly. The rise in the podcast, the success of the podcast, the love that we get from people like you is because you want long form. You want to get under the bonnet and understand where the wires lead and why, you know, you can understand I don't really do mechanics, wires, pipes, water, carburetor, that's all I know. But you want to know how these things work. And that's why the podcast works. So, yeah.
I think one of the big reasons why...
was that the question? Can't even remember what the question was now.
I think one of the big reasons why I personally sort of identified and enjoyed the podcast, they have been characters from history about whom. I think some of us were discussing yesterday over a cup of coffee that you probably read one chapter about a certain character in your history textbooks, or maybe there's a character about whom you've read a paragraph, and then you've got hammer and tongs deep into what really went down. And I think, coming back to the point you made, that we do want long form, in depth. I think that's one of the reasons why books also are a great repository. And that's my segue to asking that if the podcasting is taking so much time, are your publishers chasing you to ask you, when's your next book due?
So
How's that
I'm now 4
shaping up?
years late with a book. So if anyone sees Simon & Schuster, you haven't seen me. It has just taken over.
Last year, I was finishing The Golden Road, and Anita absolutely had to take the brunt of me not putting in as much as I should last summer, particularly during the edit. And when we were doing the American series, you were really leading that far, far more than I was. And it is difficult to do both. But the numbers are extraordinary. I mean, with a history book, you're very, very lucky if it sells. I mean, if it's a real bestseller, you might sell 50,000 hardback, if you're very, very lucky. With this pod now, we're downloading 880,000 a week. And it's going out, so many people are listening to this. And it's,
And it's also a lot more direct in terms of feedback. Are you seeing fan mail letters coming in?
God, it's like nothing I've ever done. And, I've worked for an esteemed broadcaster.
Which one's that, Anita?
Yeah, cheeky bugger. The BBC, very proud to work for the BBC. But, the difference is, they think... the difference is that when you make a programme for the BBC, it's like there's a lot of architecture around it. It's kind of crafted. What we do is we throw paint at a canvas. And often the listeners, it's so fresh, they're wet with paint. And the feedback is absolutely immediate. Because it's such an intimate listening experience, we get post bags which are just bursting. We've got a Discord community. We've got a little club, by the way. Join our club because you get extras.
Our club.
Join the club.
It's got, we don't do the newsletter, but it's got an incredible newsletter.
It's got,
if you're
amazing.
enjoying the podcast, there's somebody else completely different does it, but they follow up on everything that we
so you get
talk about.
Recommendations, a bit more in-depth reading. And also we just talk about stuff that we find really exciting that doesn't fit in other things. We get, people ask us questions. So that is lovely, that you feel that you've got a family, and people like telling us where they listen. I mean, so many people like to tell us about the dogs that are exhausted.
I have to say, Bangalore traffic figures quite a lot in.
Yeah.
Hands up who listens to Empire Podcast in the Bangalore traffic.
Yeah,
in
Bangalore traffic. Yeah, we thank you, Bangalore traffic. You don't thank it, but we love the Bangalore traffic. Captive audience. In England, it's washing up and dog walking. So we get.
And doing the ironing.
You get a little intimate snapshot of your lovely listeners, and they get to know us a lot better because we just chat the way we are in real life. So that's kind of nice.
It's odd. I think it's just the fact, as you say, that it is so unstructured and so immediate, and it doesn't have this vast budget. I mean, literally, it's just a 10 quid microphone shoved into your laptop. That's the weirdness of this technology. And yet that simple recording done twice a week, usually on a Thursday, just goes to every country in the world. And you get letters from Madagascar, from Siberia, from Alaska. It crosses boundaries in a way that most mediums just do not.
Talk to us about the money aspect. Does it pay more than writing books?
I've just paid off my mortgage.
Yeah. I mean, William is much more, you could say, upfront or crass about this. But we're not complaining. I mean, of anything I've ever done, it's the most successful thing, for sure.
Amazing. Where does the podcast go from here? I mean, do you see this coming into corporate empires like Amazon?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I want to do one of them that we'll get to eventually, which I'm sort of building up the courage to do, is tech bros and the tech bro empires. I mean, the corporatization of the world. I mean, we sort of it would be a lovely thing because we started with that. With the East India Company was, as William so beautifully says, a corporate raider that went and raided and invaded countries.
No, I know. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg is the Clive of our times. and Elon Musk, the General Dyer.
But one thing that we're finding is that there's just nothing that we can't do. I mean, I got sort of very hoppy excited that we should do something. I opened a cupboard. I've got 2 kids. I do a lot of cooking. And I opened the cupboard and I just thought, that's a vestige of empire. That came from somewhere else. There's an empire story to be told in that, the whole empire of stuff in your cupboard. So we just never run out of stories because the world has a long, checkered, rich history.
We have a roadshow that we're taking around Britain this summer. And we have a show about imperial drinks. It turns out that everything that the British drink has some connection with the empire, whether it's gin and tonics, keep going, punch.
I would keep going, you've got the mic. Things like punch, tea. Weirdly, the things that don't have imperial history, the ones that say it on the label, like Bombay Sapphire gin. Made in England, completely made in England.
And invented 20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago. So we've had huge fun taking this sort of drinks thing on the road.
We should do it in India, definitely.
We should definitely do it.
Yeah.
Would you be up for a tour? You would?
I think we'll come to Bangalore, don't you?
Okay. It would be fun. The weird thing about the live shows is we can't understand why it's working, but it is. We did a show, there's a place in London called the Barbican. And, were you there? Did you come? Oh, you beauty. You live in London. Oh, my God, he's either the nicest man in the world or a stalker. But either way, I'll tell you what, I'll take it either way. But we said we were going to do this thing. Or Goalhanger said, do the Barbican. We're like, no one's going to come. It's going to be so embarrassing. No one's going to come. It's awful.
A really, really big...
Sold out within 24 hours. So that's just crazy,
And this is to hear colonial history. It's very... What, in London?
I know. Yeah. It's just crazy. So, we're getting lots of requests to take the show on the road. So maybe we will. Maybe we'll do that. And it would be nice to come back to Bangalore because you lot are lovely.
Yes.
Aren't you lovely? Aren't you brilliant?
May I suggest, I think an episode on Tech Bros in Bangalore next year, Bangalore Lit Fest.
Very good.
We record it live.
Okay. Done.
You have a year to plan and see it out. Okay. I think let's just take some questions. We've coming to the last few minutes. Can the lady right there, can someone please pass her mic?
The mic holders are in there somewhere. Great.
I love the shows. I have one question. In one of the Empire episodes, you referred to the fact that Gandhi has had a big fall in India. What do you think about that? And is there a way that we can bring him back to where he was?
Without a doubt, there are different characters who are being brought to the fore, and Gandhi is receding as far as, I think, India is concerned. Veer Savarkar and others are being brought up, and he's receding. And that, you need to talk to your own politics about that. And will it change? Well, all I can tell you is politics is cyclical, and these things do change. In England, in Britain, nobody's heard of Savarkar, and everybody still sort of venerates Gandhi. There's a statue of Gandhi in Westminster with the shadow of the Houses of Parliament.
I just heard this morning, we're just doing the Mughals at the moment on the series, and we're just doing Akbar. I heard today that Akbar Road in Delhi has been renamed this morning.
So, these things are cyclical, it's tidal, it's in your hands. So, we just watch and commentate. That's all that we do. And it's an undeniable fact that in India, Gandhi's image is receding and others are Bose and others are coming to the fore.
Question for William.
Yeah,
Sorry,
hi.
just very quick one.
I'm also a journalist and I've written down my questions so that I don't waste any time. And I believe that there's no free press in our country. I'm curious to know what your solution would be for the new wave of textbook changes, etc., in the context of Jinnah's episode, which is, by the way, my favorite because I had no idea that we had such a misrepresented image of Jinnah in India especially, and Pakistan has the same of Mahatma Gandhi, and you guys discussed that. So what is your solution for that in terms of the new wave of textbook changes? And the other question would be how to prevent Mughal washing facts to suit the right-wing narrative, because like you mentioned in the Akbar podcast recently, he was the most secular guy, right? So that's not coming across in the right-wing narrative. So how do you think we can change that?
Well, I think the only way, I mean, in every country in the world, of course, history curriculums will be set by governments. That's not just the case here. It's true everywhere. So I don't think there's anything you can do about that. It's going to, of course, be a Ministry of Education that decides it wherever you are. But the solution is, of course, reading books and podcasts. And this sort of podcast that has no allegiance, that has no pressure on it to report one thing or another. We might be right, we might be wrong, but it's us. And we can say what we like. I think that's exactly why this podcast is so popular. And as you say, the Jinnah episode caused a great deal of surprise here, because everyone is fed one particular line about him. And he's a complicated character. I mean, in general, I think in India, there's a great deal of turning nuanced historical characters into angels or demons, asuras or devas. Human beings are not like that. Human beings are all
exactly
a mix
right.
of good and bad. They
Yeah.
do terrible things.
Yeah.
Akbar did a terrible massacre at Chittor.
Yeah.
All these characters
But I think the
great.
palette is changing. I think, the fact that younger, I mean, it's not only younger, because, by the way, our audiences we're massively grateful that there are older generation people who are also consuming because they like to listen while they live their lives.
Not all of them have worked out how to download yet. Which
Yes,
is
but what is rather, I think, marvelous is that people are seeking us out. We don't, they have to find us, and they find us, and then they tell their friends. And that kind of organic growth, to me, is entirely hopeful about people who are not satisfied with the, the black and white.
There's never been any advertising for this, or it's been totally self-generating.
It's kind of word of mouth. So, all of what William has said, that sometimes in whatever country you're in, there is this desire to present a black and white image. That is not enough for your palates, and that's why you're looking for another menu. And, we are here right now. There'll be others as well. And I think that's terrific.
Sorry.
Go for it.
Our stalker friend.
Hello. Hello.
First of all, thank you for answering my questions on the club.
Oh, we did? What's your name in the club?
Gurveer.
Oh, right. Very
so
good.
You've answered my questions in
It's
the
okay.
past.
The club is great because that's how intimate it is. People ask questions saying, I'm a member of the club. What the hell did you mean by that? And we chat. So that's great.
Given your new book, William, and Peter Frankopan's book about the Silk Road,
What was that laugh? What was that laugh?
which I think I recall Peter was on the show.
Yeah.
Are
He was
you
a great
still on
friend.
speaking terms?
We are still on speaking terms and are still great friends.
Do you want to explain why that question is even relevant?
So I should say that I don't know how many of you came to my session this afternoon, but this idea of the Golden Road is partly set against the idea of the Silk Roads. And Peter Frankopan wrote a spectacular, wonderful book on the Silk Roads. He is absolutely not the sort of simplistic version of the Silk Roads which I have a go at in the book and on my lecture today. And it's not aimed at Frankopan, but it is partly thanks to agreeable disagreements with Peter over 5 years in many different continents that this book came about. And Peter genuinely doesn't think India's that important in antiquity, and I do. We've been at this for literally about 5 years, knocking it backwards and forwards. And he knows his stuff wonderfully well, but and so it's an incredibly good exercise to have an argument with Peter, because he gives you a whole mountain of reading that makes you strengthen your case. We have only appeared. He very kindly did not choose to review the Golden Road, which I take as an enormous favour. I loved his Silk Roads book and gave it a rave review, and I think for that reason he's resisted the challenge. He was sent it about 15 times, I think, by different newspapers. But we did appear once in Cheltenham on stage together, and Yes, we had a hug afterwards.
Hi, at the floor over here. Down here. Anyway, I will.
Oh, hi.
Yeah,
Hello.
hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to know your view on the different mediums that you guys deliver history. I'll ask you a controversial question. Do you think a podcast is a less appropriate method to deliver history than a book?
No, God, no. I mean, again, it's like the difference between doing a program for a broadcaster that likes sound and architecture and formality. Writing a book is a very different discipline. There's a craft to it. There are rules to it. You can't just go on and on and on beyond your agreed limit. We often go on and on and on beyond our agreed limit. William, you did that earlier in your talk. Just want to point out. Just little aside.
Luckily you weren't there to stop me.
No. So sorry, I'm coming back to your question. Put a pin in it. But I was standing over there while William was doing his talk. I think a lot of you were here for the talk. And this lovely man from the lovely bookshop that's here, I'm sure he's around here somewhere. He came and he sort of tugged me on the sleeve. He goes, "He's 12 minutes over." And I was like, "Arr." And he's like, "Can you get him to stop?" I was like, "Darling, I've never been able to get him to stop." Totally not on duty right now. Anyway, but the podcast, I think, is just it's just another way of telling a story, which is more intimate, more friendly, more informal. I mean, books are amazing. I love researching books. I find writing books horrendous and painful, which is why I'm now 4 years late with my next book. A friend of mine, when I was moaning about this, I was moaning about my last book. I get RSI, I get bad eyes, I get really grumpy with my family. And he's like, "I don't know what you're moaning about. Writing a book is just like reading a book, except the book is trying to kill you." And that literally is my experience of writing books. But I don't know if you have a different take on that.
So I think it's an interesting question because, of course, a chit-chat is not going to have the same depth as a scholarly article. And there are obviously different levels of research, scholarship, and so on that go into a scholarly article, a book, a podcast, or a documentary. But podcasts can be potentially very in-depth. There's no need for podcasts to skip over the surface of things. And we've had some very in-depth stuff about, for example, the Great Game. We had 5 or 6 episodes around the British war in Afghanistan in 1839 to 42. And we're really going... So, I mean, and actually those are often the ones that work best when you have, like in a movie, you introduce and develop characters and get people to get to know them and sympathize with them. And then you throw them through hell, put them through a Magimix. And, you know, some of them are killed, some of them survive, some of them fall in love. You know, and that is often when it works best. When you can do, like a movie, you create character, you create narrative, you have an extraordinary tale to tell what happens to these characters, and at the end of it, you have a conclusion.
But also, with the podcast that we do, is that we have access to the best minds who've written the best books that you have loved the best. And so that's another, very good way of, I think, bringing proper, decent scholarship. We never treat the subjects lightly. We never treat you lightly. So.
And in general, people tend to want to come on the podcast, not least because it does sell books. And so we do get, the best historians to turn up, and they will sit and chat and answer questions for 2 hours. Yeah.
Okay, 2 more questions. This young man here and this lady in red. Could you just someone pass on the mic? Next question after that. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, I really like the podcast, with my favorite series being the Kohinoor. And I wanted to ask, so when will you be doing something on the French Empire? And also, when will you bring back the pause, William?
Do not, young man. I liked you so much, almost till the end of that.
I have reintroduced a special Christmas pause on the Magi episodes.
They're getting comedic. When he brings them back, they're now getting so comedically long. I can go out, make a cup of tea, and come back, and he hasn't finished his name.
And the French is a good idea. We have got it on our list.
It's on the list.
I really particularly want to do the French in Algeria and North Africa, which is an extraordinary story.
Now, there's a lady here.
Yeah. I love the irreverence in your show. And so, has there been a time when you said, oops, has it gotten you into a lot of trouble?
So far, we've been lucky.
There's a bit of a Sanghi storm at the moment about Akbar, if you look online.
Yeah.
Please join in and
pitch in.
Pitch in.
Pitch in if you feel like it. But I mean, so far it's not. I mean, trouble. It depends. I mean, people get annoyed, but X is a pit of vipers of anger anyway. So don't take much notice of that. But into some kind of huge controversy, no, not yet. I mean, it'll come. Of course, it'll come.
It's
Not
interesting.
yet.
What caused the controversy in this case was a tweet rather than because no one bothers to listen to a podcast if they're not interested in it or they disagree with it. So you're in a sense already in a podcast speaking to a community that converted, people that like hearing what you do. And so in general, it doesn't cause upsets. People download your pod only because they want to hear it. They might be disappointed in it, they might be bored by it, but they're not there to have a fight with you in general. That's the opposite of Twitter, where people will take a fight and not listen to the podcast.